Hey, welcome back to Whiskey Gal. If you haven't seen my first video, definitely go and check it out. In this video, I'm going to walk you through how to taste a whiskey for the first time so you get all those intricate layers and get the full experience. When you visit a distillery or whiskey tasting room, it's nice to know how to go about experiencing that whiskey for the first time. Now, the guide will walk you through it generally, but sometimes it can still be a bit overwhelming, can be fumbling through it a little bit. So it's good to have that grounding of knowledge to know what you're doing and why you're doing it as well. If you relate to a lot of people that I have met, you might have some bad experiences associated with whiskey, especially if it's just that real cheap whiskey that you used to get when you were younger and you have that burning sensation and that harsh flavor and you just want to shoot it back and forget about it. Or you have those lovely whiskey hangovers that you kind of don't want to ever think about again. Now, this is a completely different experience altogether. We're going to be talking more, obviously, about sipping whiskeys, about matured whiskeys, and something a lot more complex and sophisticated. Now, there are so many different whiskeys out there, and I always say there is a whiskey for everyone. But of course, you have to be willing to weed through all the bad ones to get there. Just because it's bad for you doesn't mean it's bad for everybody. Everybody has their own palate. Now, when you're handed a whiskey for the first time, if you really want to break down the steps and enjoy everything, look at the coloring first. So swirl it around that glass, get a look at the beautiful coloring on it, and compare it. You can also compare it with other whiskeys. This one is a little bit lighter. Now, hard to see. Hopefully you can see it in this light, but this one is definitely lighter. This will give you an indication of what's going on. Now, this one is a 12-year, and it has some sherry cask in it, so it's obviously going to be a little bit darker because it's aged longer, and those kind of sherry notes as well. So you get a little bit of that little hint of red in there. This one here is ex-bourbon cask all the way, and it's a little on the peaty, smoky side, but it's a little bit on the lighter side. So that gives you an indication, obviously, about what's going on and maybe what it will taste like. But don't let color distract you too much, because a lot of people think that a lighter whiskey is going to be the easier one to drink and the darker ones are just too heavy and thick and strong and all that stuff. But it's really not the case. A lot of times I found a dark whiskey can also be light, and it can be smoother than a lighter whiskey. So definitely go in with an open mind and just try them all to see what one really suits you and not just go by the color. So another thing you can do to look a little bit more like a pro, and if you're sampling an older whiskey or a cask strength whiskey that's older, definitely take a minute to swirl the whiskey in the glass. Now, what's going to happen here are some of that liquid obviously is going to stick to the sides of the glass, and it will slowly go back down. The higher ABV and the older the whiskey, the thicker it's going to be. Now, that is actually called the legs of the whiskey. So if somebody's ever talking about whiskey's legs, now you know. Now, another reason to swirl the whiskey, yes, it looks very posh, but there's actually some use to it. It's allowing the whiskey to start evaporating at a faster pace, and therefore those aromas are coming up. Now, this glass is perfectly shaped because you can swirl and allows the aromas to come up in a more focused area right at your nose. Now, if it's a wide glass, of course, your aromas are going out as well. So that's really why we have this shape. So swirl around and give it a little sniff. Don't go in too deeply at first. You might get a bit of a shock, especially if it's a pretty high percentage alcohol. These are quite low. This is about a 40%, but think about what you're smelling. Now, sometimes the first smell can be a hit of just that burning alcohol, but don't get deterred by that. Just take a moment and then go back. Now, you might get some layers of sweetness. Now, it's okay if you can't put your finger on it, but if you can smell a little bit of sweet, that's okay, or a little bit of fruit maybe. You might even get an idea of that it's caramel or butterscotch, like some kind of memory will come up and trigger, and those are what you want to use. So don't be worried about using certain words that you think. It might sound silly, but it doesn't really matter, okay? You're always going to be right in this scenario. It is your senses. Now, when you go in for your first sip, that first sip should be very small. It's more of a palate cleanser than anything. You want to get your taste buds warmed up, and so it's not a shock to the system. And sometimes that first sip you swallow it back too quickly as well, and you get kind of a burning sensation at the back of your throat. Definitely hold it in your mouth a little bit, swirl it around your mouth, leave it on your tongue if you want to. You know, you can do this for a matter of seconds, but that's what you're doing, okay? You're coating your mouth, you're getting rid of any other flavors. So then your second sip, you're going to have a lot more flavors opening up. So think about what you're tasting again, just like the smell, right? Break it down a little bit. Do you get some sweetness in there? Do you get some saltiness in there? Do you get some creamy textures in there as well? So you can think about how it's responding to your mouth. So it's a burning, it's a long-lasting flavor. You drink it down and it's gone instantly. So if you think about it, you're going to get more out of the experience. Now, when you go to a distillery or a whiskey tasting room, you're going to be trying your whiskey neat and at room temperature. That is the best way to experience the full range of flavors in a whiskey. After that, you can think about it. Now, if it has a too sharp of a finish, or if it is a really full alcohol taste that you just can't get past, this is when you can start modifying it to your taste buds by adding a couple of drops of room temperature water. Now, I've heard both ends of the spectrum as far as water goes. Now, I've had whiskey enthusiasts tell me you always have to add water no matter what. I've had whiskey enthusiasts tell me you can never add water no matter what. But for me, it really is a matter of preference. And of course, every whiskey needs something different. Now, sometimes what happens is a whiskey can have a really sharp finish, it's just like biting at the back. Or sometimes it will be so full of that alcohol flavor that you can't get past it. So adding a drop or two of water can make a lot of difference. And now you can have a little dropper if you want to get really particular, or you can just have a little cup or bowl of water and just put your finger in and get a little drop off the end. That's okay as well. I put a drop of water in this, and that was fine. And then you're going to go back and smell it again and taste it again and see the differences and the changes. There is usually a difference, whether it be dramatic or subtle, but you'll notice other flavors coming out, other aromas opening up, and it can smooth your whiskey out, or it can kind of break it up. So that's why I say every whiskey is different. You really have to try and see what happens. Now, sometimes when we're at home, we automatically put our whiskey on ice, or you might have heard of whiskey stones. Now, that is good for some whiskeys, especially when it's cheap and harsh and difficult to drink. That's when you want to use that whiskey stones or ice. When you have a really good quality whiskey, you don't really want to go that direction. When you're putting water into your whiskey, it should be room temperature. You don't want to mess with the temperature of the whiskey. When it gets colder, you won't taste as much, and that's why we say no ice. As soon as you put the ice cube in there, it's going to chill your whiskey, and then it will slowly start to water it down. So first you're going to take away flavor, and then you'll water it down even more. That doesn't really sound like a great way to enjoy your whiskey, or just whiskey stoned and it will kind of freeze your flavor, right? So you can't taste it, and that's not what you want to do. You can see why it would be good in a cheap whiskey or a harsh whiskey, or maybe even a cask strength whiskey if it is a really sharp cask strength. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I will see you next week.